What happens when $20,000 in cash hits the marble floor of a prestigious bank, scattered like autumn leaves by the deliberate hand of prejudice? What happens when that money belongs to a woman who could buy the entire building, but whose skin, color makes her invisible to those who should see her power? This is the story of Dr. Amara Richardson, a brilliant black woman who built a tech empire from nothing, only to discover that in America, success doesn't always shield you from the sting of racism. On a Tuesday morning in October 2023, Dr. Richardson walked into First National Bank of Atlanta, carrying more than just cash. She carried the hopes of her community, the weight of her ancestors' dreams, and a $2 billion partnership deal that would change everything. By Wednesday morning, that partnership was gone, dissolved by a single act of disrespect that would send shockwaves through the corporate world. This isn't just another story about individual prejudice. This is a story about systemic racism, about how one moment of discrimination can unravel years of progress, and about how a woman's dignified response to hatred became a catalyst for unprecedented change. As we've seen in real cases like Sontor Thomas's experience with TCF Bank, where a black man was questioned by police for simply trying to deposit legitimate settlement checks. The phenomenon of banking while black continues to plague our financial institutions. Dr. Richardson's story teaches us that racism isn't just about individual acts of cruelty. It's about the institutional power structures that allow such acts to flourish, and the extraordinary courage it takes to stand against them. This is her story, and it's a story that America needs to hear. Dr. Amara Richardson wasn't born into privilege. She grew up in the housing projects of East Atlanta, where her grandmother, May Richardson, raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8 years old. May had lived through the Jim Crow era, working as a seamstress and domestic worker, saving every penny she could in a mason jar hidden behind the stove because, as she told young Amara, banks weren't made for people like us, baby girl. The racial climate of 1990s Atlanta was complex. While the city proudly called itself too busy to hate, young black children like Amara still faced stark reminders of inequality. The schools in her neighborhood were underfunded. The library had more broken computers than working ones, and the local bank branch, if you could even call it that, was nothing more than a check-cashing storefront with bulletproof glass. Banking deserts disproportionately affect communities of color, creating barriers to wealth building that persist across generations. But May Richardson had dreams bigger than their circumstances. She saw something special in her granddaughter, brilliant mind that could absorb information like a sponge and solve problems that left adults scratching their heads. When Amara was 12, May scraped together enough money to buy a used computer from a pawn shop. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, May would say, watching Amara code late into the night by the light of a single desk lamp. Amara's talent in mathematics and computer science became evident early. She taught herself programming languages, built websites for local businesses, and by age 16 was making more money from her coding work than many adults in her neighborhood. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, one of the few black educators in the building, recognized Amara's potential and personally drove her to college interviews. Knowing that transportation was a barrier many brilliant students from her community faced, the college application process revealed another layer of institutional racism. Despite having perfect grades and test scores, Amara faced skepticism from admissions officers, who questioned whether she could handle the rigorous academic environment of prestigious universities. The subtext was clear. They saw a black girl from the projects and made assumptions about her capabilities. It took Mrs. Williams' fierce advocacy and Amara's exceptional interview performances to secure her spot at Georgia Tech with a full scholarship. Dr. Richardson's story teaches us that racism isn't just about individual acts of cruelty. It's about the institutional power structures that allow such acts to flourish, and the extraordinary courage it takes to stand against them. This is her story, and it's a story that America needs to hear. Dr. Amara Richardson wasn't born into privilege. She grew up in the housing projects of East Atlanta, where her grandmother, May Richardson, raised her after her parents died in a car accident. When she was 8 years old, May had lived through the Jim Crow era, working as a seamstress and domestic worker, saving every penny she could in a mason jar hidden behind the stove, because, as she told young Amara, banks weren't made for people like us, baby girl. Racial climate of 1990s Atlanta was complex. While the city proudly called itself too busy to hate, young black children like Amara still faced stark reminders of inequality. The schools in her neighborhood were underfunded. The library had more broken computers than working ones. And the local bank branch, if you could even call it, that was nothing more than a check-cashing storefront with bulletproof glass. Banking. Deserts disproportionately affect communities of color, creating barriers to wealth building that persist across generations. But May Richardson had dreams bigger than their circumstances. She saw something special in her granddaughter, a brilliant mind that could absorb information like a sponge and solve problems that left adults scratching their heads. When Amara was 12, May scraped together enough money to buy a used computer from a pawn shop. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, May would say, watching Amara code late into the night by the light of a single desk lamp. Amara's talent in mathematics and computer science became evident early. She taught herself programming languages, built websites for local businesses, and by age 16 was making more money from her coding work than many adults in her neighborhood. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, one of the few black educators in the building, recognized Amara's potential and personally drove her to college interviews, knowing that transportation was a barrier many brilliant students from her community faced. The college application process revealed another layer of institutional racism. Despite having perfect grades and test scores, Amara faced skepticism from admissions officers who questioned whether she could handle the rigorous academic environment of prestigious universities. The subtext was clear. They saw a black girl from the projects and made assumptions about her capabilities. It took Mrs. Williams' fierce advocacy and Amara's exceptional interview performances to secure her spot at Georgia Tech with a full scholarship. College was both a triumph and a culture shock. Amara excelled academically, graduating summa cum laude with degrees in computer science and business administration, but she was often the only black woman in her advanced classes. She faced microaggressions daily, professors who seemed surprised by her intelligence, classmates who assumed she was there because of affirmative action rather than merit, and networking events where she was frequently mistaken for catering. Staff. After graduation, Amara joined a tech startup where she quickly rose through the ranks, her innovations saving the company millions. But when promotion time came, she was repeatedly passed over for less qualified white colleagues. A pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Her ideas were credited to others, her achievements minimized, and her leadership potential questioned. The breaking point came when her own algorithm was patented under a white colleague's name in 2015. At age 28, Dr. Richardson made a decision that would change her life forever. She left the corporate world and started her own company, TechBridge Solutions, focused on creating technology platforms that connected underserved communities with essential services. Working from her grandmother's kitchen table, surviving on savings and May's home-cooked meals, Amara built her first prototype, a mobile app that helped people in banking desserts access financial services and financial education. The company grew exponentially. Within 3 years, TechBridge Solutions had secured contracts with major corporations, nonprofits, and government agencies. By 2020, The company was valued at $500 million. By 2023, it had reached $1.2 billion in valuation, making Dr. Richardson one of the youngest black women to build a unicorn company. She had offices in 12 cities, employed over 800 people, and was in negotiations for a $2 billion partnership with Global Financial Corp that would expand her platform internationally. But success hadn't insulated her from racism. She still faced skepticism in boardrooms, still had to prove herself twice as hard as her white counterparts, and still encountered the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, discrimination that research shows affects black entrepreneurs even when they're more qualified than their white peers. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was building bridges to financial inclusion while still facing barriers in the very institutions. Her technology was designed to democratize. Tuesday, October 17, 2023, started like any other day for Dr. Amara Richardson. She had spent the morning in her corner office on the 40th floor of the Peachtree Tower, reviewing the final details of what would be the largest partnership deal in her company's history. Global Financial Corp, one of the world's largest financial services companies, was ready to sign a $2 billion agreement that would integrate TechBridge Solutions' platform into their global network, potentially reaching 50 million underserved customers worldwide. The signing was scheduled for the next morning, but there was one final requirement. Dr. Richardson needed to make a substantial cash deposit to demonstrate liquidity for the partnership's initial capital requirements. It was an unusual request, but Global Financial's executives had insisted on seeing proof of immediate cash flow capabilities. Her CFO had suggested a wire transfer, but the executives specifically requested a physical cash deposit at First National Bank of Atlanta. Global Financial's primary banking partner, Dr. Richardson, had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a tailored navy blue suit from her favorite designer, her grandmother's pearl necklace, and comfortable heels that still made her feel powerful. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world through talent, hard work, and perseverance. At 36, she had learned to navigate predominantly white spaces with grace while never compromising her authentic self. First National Bank of Atlanta occupied the ground floor of a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. The bank's marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and mahogany fixtures were designed to project wealth and prestige. Dr. Richardson had been banking there for 5 years, ever since TechBridge Solutions had reached the revenue threshold that made her eligible for their premium business services. She knew several of the managers by name and had always been treated with professional courtesy. But when she approached the teller window at 2:47 p.m., carrying a leather briefcase containing $20,000 in cash, she immediately sensed something was different. The teller, a young white woman named Brielle Patterson, looked up from her computer screen with barely concealed annoyance. Her nameplate indicated she was new to the bank, having started just 3 months earlier. "Can I help you?" Brielle asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather be doing anything else. "Good afternoon," Dr. Richardson replied warmly, placing her business card on the counter. "I'm Dr. Amara Richardson, and I need to make a deposit to my business account." Brielle glanced at the business card without reading it, then looked Dr. Richardson up and down with thinly veiled skepticism. When Dr. Richardson opened her briefcase to reveal the neatly organized stacks of $100 bills, Brielle's eyebrows shot up in suspicion rather than recognition of a substantial business transaction. "Where did you get this money?" Brielle demanded, her voice carrying across the otherwise quiet bank lobby. Dr. Richardson felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being questioned about her legitimacy. She had experienced this before, the assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly have access to substantial amounts of money through legitimate means. Taking a deep breath, she maintained her composure. "This is a business deposit for TechBridge Solutions," she explained patiently. "I'm the CEO and founder. My account information is right here on my card, and I have all the necessary documentation. But Brielle wasn't listening. She was staring at the money with a mixture of suspicion and what could only be described as disgust. "I'm going to need to verify this," she announced loudly, making no effort to lower her voice. "We can't just accept random cash from people." Other customers in the bank began to turn and stare. Dr. Richardson felt the weight of their gazes. Some curious, others judgmental. She recognized the look she had seen it in boardrooms, at conferences, and in countless other situations where her presence was questioned simply because of her race. "Of course," Dr. Richardson responded calmly. "I have my identification, business license, and account information. What specific verification do you need?" Instead of answering, Brielle stood up and called across the bank to her supervisor. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to look at this situation over here." The use of the word situation to describe a routine business deposit was not lost on Dr. Richardson. James Henderson, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, approached the counter with a concerned expression. When he saw Dr. Richardson and the money, his face hardened. "What seems to be the problem here?" Henderson asked, directing his question to Brielle rather than to Dr. Richardson. "She's trying to deposit a large amount of cash, and I'm not sure about it," Brielle replied. As if Dr. Richardson wasn't standing right there, Dr. Richardson stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Dr. Amara Richardson, CEO of TechBridge Solutions. I've been banking here for 5 years, and I need to make a routine business deposit. I have all the proper identification and documentation." Henderson barely glanced at her offered credentials. "Ma'am, we're going to need to investigate the source of these funds. This is a lot of cash, and we have protocols for suspicious transactions." "Plea." Word suspicious hit like a slap. Dr. Richardson's calm began to crack. "Suspicious? I'm a legitimate business owner, making a deposit to my own account. What exactly is suspicious about that?" "Please don't raise your voice, ma'am," Henderson said condescendingly, though Dr. Richardson had spoken in the same measured tone she'd maintained throughout the interaction. By now, every customer and employee in the bank was watching. Dr. Richardson could feel the heat of their stares, the weight of their assumptions. She thought of her grandmother May, who had warned her about moments like this. She thought of all the times she had been the only black woman in the room, all the times she had had to prove herself, all the times her success had been questioned. What happened next would haunt her for weeks. Brielle, perhaps emboldened by her supervisor's support, reached across the counter and swept the carefully organized stacks of money onto the floor. $20,000 scattered across the marble tiles like confetti, some bills sliding. Under other customers' feet. If you can't explain where this money came from properly, then maybe you shouldn't be trying to deposit it, Brielle said with a smirk. The bank fell silent. Even the usual sounds of keyboards clicking and phones ringing seemed to stop. Dr. Richardson stood frozen, staring at her money she had earned through years of hard work, innovation, and determination scattered across the floor like trash. The symbolism was overwhelming. Here she was, one of the most successful black women in tech, watching her money literally thrown on the ground by someone who saw her as nothing more than a potential criminal. The humiliation was complete, and it was public. "I want to speak to the bank president," Dr. Richardson said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "He's not available," Henderson replied dismissively. "Now, are you going to pick up this money and leave? Or do we need to call security?" Dr. Richardson looked down at the scattered bills, then back at Henderson and Brielle. She thought about her grandmother's words about dignity, about the civil rights leaders who had faced far worse with grace, about the responsibility she carried as a successful black woman to respond to racism with strength rather than anger. Slowly, deliberately, She knelt down and began gathering her money. Other customers watched in uncomfortable silence as a millionaire. CEO crawled on a bank floor, collecting bills that had been thrown there by prejudice. No one offered to help. No one spoke up. The silence was deafening. As she stood up, money in hand, Dr. Richardson looked directly at Henderson. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the bank, her head held high, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She didn't know it yet, but by the time she reached her car, videos of the incident were already being uploaded to social media by other customers who had recorded the entire exchange on their phones. Within hours, #BankingWhileBlack would be trending worldwide, and the $2 billion partnership that had brought her to the bank in the first place would be hanging by a thread. The drive back to her office felt like the longest 20 minutes of Dr. Richardson's life. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, the humiliation of the past hour washing over her in waves. She had built an empire, employed hundreds of people, and generated millions in revenue, yet she had just been treated like a criminal. For the crime of banking while Black Dot, by the time she reached her building, her phone was buzzing incessantly. Her assistant, Maria Santos, met her at the elevator with a grim expression. "Dr. Richardson, we need to talk." The videos are everywhere. In her office, Maria showed her the footage that was spreading across social media platforms. Multiple angles captured the entire incident: Briel's dismissive attitude, Henderson's condescending treatment, and the moment when $20,000 was swept onto the floor. The #BankingWhileBlack was trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of financial discrimination. "Global financials executives are asking for an emergency meeting," Maria reported. They single quotes concerned about the optics. Dr. Richardson felt her heart sink. The partnership deal, 5 years in the making, was in jeopardy because she had faced racism while trying to meet their requirements. The irony was bitter. She was being punished for being the victim of discrimination. Within hours, the incident had become national news. Banking discrimination against Black customers was not new, but rarely had it been so publicly documented with such a high-profile victim. News outlets picked up the story, drawing parallels to cases like Sontor Thomas, who faced similar treatment. When trying to deposit legitimate settlement checks from a discrimination lawsuit he had won against his former employer, the attacks came swiftly. Online trolls questioned her credentials, suggesting she must have obtained her money through illegal means. Conservative commentators blamed her for playing the race card and suggested she should have simply complied with the bank's requests. The criticism was familiar, but no less painful the victim being blamed for the discrimination she faced, but the support was overwhelming. Fellow entrepreneurs, civil rights leaders, and thousands of ordinary people rallied behind her. #IStandWithAmara became a rallying cry. Other successful Black professionals shared their own stories of banking discrimination, creating a chorus of voices that could no longer be ignored. Dr. Richardson's legal team, led by civil rights attorney Jonathan Mitchell, immediately began building a case. The evidence was clear. The bank had violated numerous anti-discrimination laws, and the public nature of the incident made it impossible to deny. But Dr. Richardson wanted more than just a legal victory. She wanted systemic change. The personal toll was severe. Dr. Richardson found herself unable to sleep, replaying the incident over and over. She thought about her grandmother May, who had faced far worse discrimination with dignity and grace. She thought about the young Black girls who looked up to her as a role model, and how this incident might affect their dreams of success. The business impact was immediate and devastating. Global Financial Corp, citing reputational concerns, suspended negotiations on the $2 billion partnership. Other potential partners began distancing themselves, worried about being associated with controversy. Stock prices for publicly traded companies that had partnerships with TechBridge Solutions began to fluctuate. Dr. Richardson's executive team gathered for an emergency board meeting. The mood was somber as they discussed the potential fallout. CFO Michael Chun presented the worst-case scenarios: lost contracts, reduced valuations, and potential bankruptcy if major partners pulled out. We could issue a public apology, suggested Q. Sarah Williams, a well-meaning white woman who had been with the company since its early days. Maybe downplay the racial aspect and focus on the bank's unprofessional behavior? The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dr. Richardson looked around the table at her leadership team, people she had hired, mentored, and trusted with her company's future. The fact that anyone on her team would suggest she apologize for being the victim of racism was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Absolutely not, Dr. Richardson said firmly. I will not apologize for being black. I will not apologize for succeeding while black. And I will not allow this company to send the message that racism is acceptable as long as it's convenient for business. The room fell silent. Dr. Richardson could see the fear in some faces, the uncertainty about what her principled stand might cost them all. But she also saw something else: respect, admiration, and a growing determination to fight back. Here's what we're going to do, she continued, her voice gaining strength. We're going to document everything. We're going to file every lawsuit we can. We're going to use our platform to expose the systemic racism in financial institutions. And we're going to build our own alternative. The idea had been forming in her mind since she left the bank. If traditional financial institutions couldn't treat black customers with dignity, then she would create institutions that could. TechBridge Solutions had the technology, the expertise, and now the motivation to revolutionize banking for underserved communities. Community support began to mobilize. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, announced they would provide legal support. The Urban League committed to amplifying her story. Black-owned businesses and historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, pledged to move their accounts away from First National Bank. Dr. Richardson also faced pressure from within her own community. Some successful black professionals privately urged her to settle quietly, arguing that making noise would only hurt her business prospects. You've already made it, one prominent lawyer told her at a private gathering. Don't jeopardize everything for principle. But Dr. Richardson understood something these advisors didn't. Her success was meaningless if it didn't create pathways for others. If she remained silent, she would be complicit in a system that would continue to humiliate and discriminate against the next black entrepreneur, the next black professional, the next black child with dreams of success. The resistance took many forms. First National Bank initially offered a private settlement with a non-disclosure agreement, a substantial sum of money in exchange for her silence. When she refused, they launched a public relations campaign suggesting she was exploiting the incident for personal gain. Their lawyers argued that bank employees were simply following standard protocols for large cash transactions. Media outlets began investigating Dr. Richardson's background, looking for any scandal or controversy that might undermine her credibility. They found nothing. Her record was spotless, her business practices ethical, and her success legitimate. This only frustrated her critics more, leading to increasingly desperate attempts to discredit her. The struggle was exhausting. Dr. Richardson found herself spending more time dealing with the aftermath of discrimination than running her business. But she also discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Every story shared by other victims of banking discrimination, every young black entrepreneur who reached out for advice, every supporter who stood with her despite the cost, they all fueled her determination. 3 weeks after the incident, Dr. Richardson made a decision that would change everything. standing before a packed press conference, surrounded by civil rights leaders, community activists, and supporters, she announced her response to the discrimination she had faced. It wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about transforming an entire system. The press conference on November 8, 2023, was unlike anything the Atlanta business community had ever seen. Dr. Amara Richardson stood at the podium. In the grand ballroom of the Omni Hotel, facing a sea of reporters, cameras, and supporters. The room buzzed with anticipation as she prepared to reveal her response to the banking discrimination that had captivated the nation. 3 weeks ago, I walked into First National Bank as a successful businesswoman attempting to make a routine deposit. Dr. Richardson began, her voice clear and strong. I left that bank as a symbol of everything that remains broken in our financial system. The room fell silent as she recounted the incident, her words carrying the weight of not just personal humiliation, but collective pain shared by countless others who had faced similar discrimination. Behind her, a large screen displayed statistics about banking discrimination, including data showing that banks offer inferior loan terms to Black entrepreneurs even when they're more qualified than their white counterparts. Today, I'm here to announce that discrimination has consequences, she continued. Global Financial Corp has terminated our $2 billion partnership, not because TechBridge Solutions isn't worthy of it, but because they were afraid to stand with a Black woman who refused to be silenced. The audience stirred. This was the first public confirmation that the partnership had been lost, and the implications were staggering. Dr. Richardson paused, letting the magnitude of the statement sink in. But I want to be clear about something, she said, her voice rising with conviction. They didn't just lose a partnership with TechBridge Solutions. They lost the opportunity to be part of the solution to financial inequality in America. And that loss is entirely theirs. Behind her, the presentation changed to show the launch of her new initiative, the Equity Banking Collective, a revolutionary digital banking platform designed specifically to serve underserved communities with dignity and respect. The platform would provide all traditional banking services while incorporating financial education, business development resources, and community investment opportunities. We are not victims, Dr. Richardson declared. We are innovators. We are entrepreneurs. We are the solution to our own problems. If traditional banks won't serve us with respect, we'll build banks that will. The announcement sent shockwaves through the financial industry. Dr. Richardson revealed that she'd been working around the clock for 3 weeks, assembling a team of financial experts, technology developers, and community leaders. The Equity Banking Collective had already secured $500 million in initial funding from a consortium of Black-owned investment firms, progressive venture capital funds, and individual high-net-worth investors who were tired of systemic discrimination. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Dr. Richardson announced that Apex Financial Services, Global Financial Corp's biggest competitor, had not only agreed to a $3 billion partnership with TechBridge Solutions, $1 billion more than the original Global Financial deal, but had also committed to being the primary technology partner for the Equity Banking Collective. Apex Financial understood something that Global Financial did not, Dr. Richardson explained. Standing on the right side of history is not just morally correct, it's good business. They will be implementing our technology across their entire network, reaching 100 million customers globally, not just the 50 million originally proposed. The reversal was breathtaking. In 3 weeks, Dr. Richardson had not only recovered from the discrimination she faced, but had turned it into a catalyst for unprecedented growth and systemic change. The partnership with Apex Financial was worth 50% more than the original deal, and the new banking platform positioned her company as a leader in financial inclusion. Technology. The press conference revealed the extent of the coalition that had formed around Dr. Richardson's cause. Representatives from the NAACP, Urban League, and National Black Chamber of Commerce announced their support for the Equity Banking Collective. 23 historically black colleges and universities committed to using the platform for their banking needs. Over 500 black-owned businesses pledged to transfer their accounts from traditional banks. But perhaps most significantly, Dr. Richardson announced that major corporations were taking notice. 12 Fortune 500 companies had committed to auditing their banking relationships and requiring their financial partners to demonstrate concrete progress on racial equity. The incident at First National Bank had become a watershed moment, forcing corporate America to confront the reality of systemic racism in financial services. The human impact was equally powerful. Dr. Richardson shared stories from the thousands of people who had contacted her office, sharing their own experiences with banking discrimination. A single mother who was denied a business loan despite excellent credit. A young professional who was followed by security guards every time he entered his own bank. An elderly black couple who were told they couldn't afford a mortgage for a home they were paying cash for. This is not about one incident, Dr. Richardson said, her voice breaking with emotion. This is about centuries of exclusion, decades of discrimination, and generations of black Americans who were told they weren't worthy of financial dignity. Today, we say enough. The climax came when Dr. Richardson revealed the personal cost of her stand. She had risked everything: her company, her fortune, her career, to fight discrimination. The lost global financial partnership had cost her company $300 million in immediate revenue and had forced her to lay off 150 employees. Several board members had resigned, and major investors had pulled out, fearing the controversy. I could have taken the settlement, she said quietly. I could have signed the non-disclosure agreement. I could have stayed silent and protected my business. But I thought about my grandmother May, who saved her money in a mason jar because banks weren't made for people like us. I thought about every black child who dreams of success but faces barriers we still haven't torn down. I thought about the responsibility that comes with the platform I've been given. The room was silent, hanging on every word. Success without purpose is meaningless, Dr. Richardson continued. Wealth without justice is empty. I refused to be successful while my community remained excluded. I refused to be wealthy while my people remained marginalized. And I refused to be silent while discrimination continued unchallenged. As she spoke, the screen behind her showed real-time updates of the movement her stand had sparked. #BankingWhileBlack had generated over 50 million social media interactions. Thousands of people had shared their own stories of discrimination. Hundreds of businesses had committed to the Equity Banking Collective. Dozens of traditional banks had announced new diversity and inclusion initiatives. But the most powerful moment came when Dr. Richardson's grandmother May, now 89 years old, joined her on stage. May had been in the audience, watching her granddaughter transform pain into power, discrimination into innovation, and humiliation into hope. "Baby girl," May said into the microphone, her voice strong despite her age, "you done something I never thought I'd live to see. You took that mason jar money and turned it into a movement. You took their hate and turned it into hope. You made banks for people like us." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Through tears, Dr. Richardson hugged her grandmother, the woman who had taught her that dignity was more valuable than money, that principle was more important than profit, and that sometimes you have to risk everything to change everything. 6 months after the press conference, the transformation was complete and far-reaching. The Equity Banking Collective had officially launched with 50,000 customers in its first week, a coup record for any new financial institution. The platform's innovative approach to banking, combining traditional services with financial education and community investment, had been featured on the cover of Forbes, Fast Company, and Harvard Business Review. Dr. Richardson stood in the lobby of the Equity Banking Collective's flagship branch in downtown Atlanta, watching customers conduct their business with smiles on their faces and dignity intact. The branch was designed with warm colors, comfortable seating, and community artwork. Most importantly, every employee had been trained extensively in cultural competency and anti-bias practices. "Good morning, Dr. Johnson," called out Marcus Williams, a teller who had previously worked at First National Bank before joining the Equity Banking Collective. "How can I serve you today?" Dr. Johnson, a black physician who had faced discrimination at traditional banks for decades, beamed as she conducted her transaction. "You know, Marcus, I never thought I'd enjoy banking until I came here. Y'all treat us like human beings." This scene repeated itself daily across the Equity Banking Collective's 25 branches in 10 cities. The platform had processed over $2 billion in transactions, provided $500 million in loans to underserved communities, and maintained a customer satisfaction rating of 98%, the highest in the industry. The success of the Equity Banking Collective had forced the entire financial industry to reckon with its practices. First National Bank, facing massive boycotts and regulatory scrutiny, had undergone a complete transformation. They fired Brielle Patterson and James Henderson, implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, and hired a chief diversity officer with real authority to make changes. But the changes went far beyond individual institutions. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, prompted by the national attention to banking discrimination, launched the largest investigation into financial services bias in U.S. history. 17 banks were found to have engaged in discriminatory practices, resulting in over $800 million in fines and remediation. Payments to affected communities. Dr. Richardson's personal vindication was complete, but not entirely satisfying. While she had achieved unprecedented success, growing TechBridge Solutions into a $5 billion company and becoming one of the most influential entrepreneurs in America, she remained focused on the broader mission of systemic change. The partnership with Apex Financial had exceeded all expectations. Their joint platform was now serving 150 million customers globally, with particularly strong growth in underserved communities. The technology was being adapted for use in developing countries, potentially bringing banking services to millions of people who had never had access to formal financial institutions. But perhaps the most meaningful resolution came from the ripple effects of Dr. Richardson's stand. Inspired by her example, other black entrepreneurs began speaking out about discrimination they had faced. A movement emerged called Dignity in Business, advocating for equal treatment in all aspects of commerce, not just banking. The impact on education was particularly profound. Dr. Richardson had established the May Richardson Foundation, named after her grandmother, which provided scholarships and business development support to young black entrepreneurs. The foundation had already supported 500 students and 200 startups, creating a pipeline of diverse leaders for the future. Corporate America had also been transformed. The 12 Fortune 500 companies that initially supported Dr. Richardson's cause had grown to over 100, all committing to supplier diversity programs and inclusive banking practices. The business case for diversity had never been clearer. Companies that embraced inclusion saw improved performance, innovation, and customer satisfaction. Personal relationships had evolved as well. Dr. Richardson's executive team, initially shaken by the crisis, had emerged stronger and more committed to the company's mission. Sarah Williams, the coup who had suggested downplaying the racial aspect of the incident, had become one of the most vocal advocates for systemic change, leading Apex Financial's diversity initiatives. The legal resolution was comprehensive. Dr. Richardson's lawsuit against First National Bank had been settled for an undisclosed sum, rumored to be in the tens of millions. More importantly, the settlement required the bank to implement specific anti-discrimination measures and submit to ongoing monitoring by civil rights organizations. But money was never the point. Dr. Richardson had used her settlement to establish a legal defense fund for other victims of banking discrimination, ensuring that those without her resources could still fight for justice. The fund had already supported 150 cases, winning significant settlements and policy changes. The transformation of Dr. Richardson herself was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the resolution. She had evolved from a successful entrepreneur into a movement leader, from someone who succeeded within a flawed system to someone who changed the system itself. Her office walls were now covered not just with business awards, but with letters from young black girls who saw her as proof that their dreams were possible. "I used to measure success by the size of my bank account," Dr. Richardson reflected during a speech at the annual National Black MBA Association conference. "Now I measure it by the number of barriers we've broken down, the number of dreams we've made possible, and the number of children who will grow up in a world more just than the one we inherited." The broader implications of Dr. Richardson's story continued to unfold. Academic researchers studied the incident as a case study in how individual acts of resistance can catalyze systemic change. Business schools incorporated her story into their curricula on leadership, ethics, and social responsibility. The incident had become a watershed moment in the ongoing struggle for racial equality in America. That international recognition followed. Dr. Richardson was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about financial inclusion and systemic change. The United Nations featured the Equity Banking Collective as a model for inclusive economic development. Her story had transcended national boundaries, inspiring similar movements in other countries facing issues of economic discrimination. Most profound resolution, however, remained personal. Dr. Richardson's relationship with her grandmother May had deepened through their shared experience of transformation. May, who had once hidden money in a mason jar because banks weren't made for people like them, now served on the board of the Equity Banking Collective, providing wisdom and perspective that no business school could teach. "Baby girl," May said, during a quiet moment at the family's annual reunion, "you did something I never could have imagined. You took their hate and turned it into hope. You took their exclusion and turned it into inclusion. You took their discrimination and turned it into opportunity." The resolution of Dr. Richardson's story was not an ending, but a beginning. The Equity Banking Collective continued to grow, TechBridge Solutions continued to innovate, and the movement for financial justice continued to gain momentum. Most importantly, a new generation of Black entrepreneurs was emerging, armed with the tools, resources, and inspiration to build the future they wanted to see. Dr. Amara Richardson's story began with $20,000 scattered across a marble floor, but it ended with millions of lives changed and a financial system transformed. Her journey from humiliation to triumph teaches us profound lessons about the nature of racism, resilience, and the power of principled resistance. The incident at First National Bank was not unique. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that affects millions of Black Americans every day. What made Dr. Richardson's experience different was not the discrimination itself, but her response to it. She refused to be silenced, refused to settle quietly, and refused to accept that success meant tolerating injustice. Her story demonstrates that individual acts of racism are symptoms of systemic problems that require systemic solutions. The teller who threw her money on the floor was not just one person making a bad decision. She was the product of institutions, training, and cultural assumptions that devalue Black people and their contributions to society. But Dr. Richardson's Response proves that systemic problems can be solved through strategic, sustained action. She didn't just fight discrimination, she built alternatives to discriminatory systems. She didn't just seek justice for herself, she created pathways for others to succeed. She didn't just overcome obstacles, she removed them for future generations. The transformation she achieved was possible because she understood a fundamental truth. Real change happens when we stop asking discriminatory systems to include us and start building systems that reflect our values from the ground up. The Equity Banking Collective wasn't just a response to discrimination. It was a vision of what finance could look like when designed with dignity and inclusion as core principles. Her grandmother, May's mason jar, a symbol of exclusion from traditional banking, became the inspiration for a financial institution that served millions. The money scattered on the floor became the foundation for a movement that redistributed not just wealth, but power and opportunity. The humiliation became the catalyst for unprecedented change. The ripple effects of Dr. Richardson's stand continue to expand. Every Black entrepreneur who secures fair lending, every family who banks without fear of discrimination, every child who sees possibility instead of barriers, they all benefit from her refusal to accept the unacceptable. Her story proves that one person's courage to stand against injustice can create waves of change that transform entire industries. But perhaps the most important lesson from Dr. Richardson's story is that success without justice is incomplete. She could have remained silent, protected her business interests, and enjoyed personal prosperity while others faced the same discrimination she experienced. Instead, she chose to risk everything for the principle that dignity and respect should not be luxuries available only to the privileged few. This choice to sacrifice immediate comfort for long-term change is the essence of moral leadership. It's what separates those who succeed within broken systems from those who fix the systems themselves. Dr. Richardson understood that her success was meaningful only if it opened doors for others, that her wealth was valuable only if it created wealth for her community, and that her platform was powerful only if she used it to amplify voices that had been silenced. The story also highlights the collective power of community response to discrimination. Dr. Richardson didn't fight alone. She was supported by civil rights organizations, fellow entrepreneurs, community leaders, and thousands of ordinary people who recognized that her fight was their fight too. The boycotts, protests, and public pressure that followed the incident demonstrated that racism has consequences when communities unite to impose them. Today, as we continue to grapple with systemic racism in all its forms, Dr. Richardson's story provides both inspiration and instruction. It shows us that change is possible, but it requires courage, sacrifice, and sustained effort. It teaches us that individual success is not enough. We must work to ensure that success is accessible to all who earn it, regardless of their race, background, or circumstances. The call to action from Dr. Richardson's story is clear. We cannot be silent in the face of discrimination. We cannot be satisfied with individual success while systemic barriers remain, and we cannot wait for others to create the change we want to see. Whether we're entrepreneurs building inclusive businesses, consumers choosing where to spend our money, or citizens demanding accountability from institutions, we all have a role to play in creating a more just society. The $20,000 that once lay scattered on a bank floor became the seed money for a revolution in financial services. The humiliation of one woman became the liberation of millions. The discrimination that was meant to diminish became the catalyst for unprecedented growth and change. Dr. Amara Richardson's story reminds us that our response to injustice defines not just our character, but our destiny. We can choose to accept discrimination as the price of participation in society, or we can choose to challenge it as the barrier to a better world. We can choose to seek individual success within flawed systems, Or we can choose to build better systems that create success. For all, the choice is ours. But the lesson of Dr. Richardson's life is clear. When we choose courage over comfort, principle over profit, and justice over individual gain, we don't just change our own lives, we change the world. Her story continues to unfold, inspiring new generations of leaders who understand that true success is measured not by what we achieve for ourselves, but by what we make possible for others. In a world where discrimination still persists, where bias still limits potential, and where systemic barriers still block opportunities, Dr. Richardson's story offers hope. It proves that one person's refusal to accept injustice can become a movement that transforms society. It demonstrates that the arc of history doesn't bend toward justice automatically. It bends because people like Dr. Richardson grab it and pull it in the right direction. The bank teller who threw money on the floor thought she was putting a black woman in her place. Instead, she unleashed a force that would reshape an entire industry and inspire a movement for economic justice that continues to grow. Sometimes the greatest victories emerge from the deepest injustices, and sometimes the most transformative changes begin with a simple decision to stand up and refuse to be diminished. Dr. Amara Richardson's legacy is not just the banks she built, the laws she changed, or the barriers she broke. Her legacy is the example she set that success without justice is hollow, that individual achievement without collective progress is incomplete, and that the measure of our lives is not what we accumulate for ourselves, but what we create for others. The mason jar has been replaced by a financial empire. The scattered bills have become a movement for change. The humiliation has been transformed into hope. And the young girl from the housing projects, who once coded by lamplight, now lights the way for millions of others who dare to dream of a world where dignity, respect, and opportunity are not determined by the color of one's skin, but by the content of one's character and the strength of one's determination. This is the power of principled resistance. This is the promise of courageous leadership. This is the proof that even in our darkest moments, we can choose to be the light that illuminates a better path forward. Dr. Richardson shows that light, and in doing so, she lit a flame that continues to burn bright, inspiring all of us to build the world we want to see, one act of courage, one moment of resistance, one choice for justice at a time.